What happens when America's most trusted voice asks Hollywood's toughest legend one simple question about loneliness, and the answer stops time itself? Well, you're about to discover the moment that changed Johnny Carson forever. This wasn't supposed to be emotional. This wasn't supposed to cut deep. Johnny Carson had spent 30 years perfecting the art of entertainment, guiding movie stars through charming conversations that made America smile before bed. But on May 21, 1982, when Clint Eastwood settled into that famous guest chair, something shifted. What started as typical late-night banter about westerns and directing suddenly transformed into something nobody in Studio One was prepared for. Not the 70 million viewers watching at home. Not Doc Severinsen holding his trumpet. And definitely not Johnny Carson, who thought he'd mastered every possible direction an interview could go. Because when Carson leaned forward and asked what seemed like an innocent question about the cost of being Hollywood's loneliest icon, Eastwood didn't deflect. He didn't charm his way around it. Instead, he looked directly into Johnny's eyes and said words that would leave the king of late night completely speechless on live television. The Tonight Show was Carson's kingdom. For 3 decades, he controlled every laugh, every pause, every emotional beat with the precision of a heart surgeon. Celebrities arrived to promote films, share amusing stories, and leave audiences feeling good. That was the magic. That was what worked. But Clint Eastwood had never been one to follow scripts. And on this specific night, when Carson asked about the darkness behind the man with no-name persona, Eastwood's answer cut through 30 years of late-night pleasantries like a bullet through glass. What he said next made Johnny Carson do something he'd done only twice before in his entire career. And trust me, you need to hear this story. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because what unfolds next is one of the most powerful moments in television history. Drop a comment and let me know, where in the world are you watching this from? The familiar Tonight Show theme music filled Studio One in Burbank as Johnny Carson walked through those iconic curtains to thunderous applause. It was spring of 1982, and The Tonight Show was pulling in 70 million viewers a week, making it the most powerful platform in entertainment. "We have a wonderful show tonight," Carson said with that trademark smile, adjusting his tie with perfect comic timing. "My first guest is a man who's redefined American cinema. You know him from A Fistful of Dollars, Dirty Harry, and his new film Honky Tonk Man. Please welcome the legendary Clint Eastwood." The audience erupted as Eastwood emerged from backstage, moving with that unhurried walk that had become his signature. He wore a simple gray suit and black tie, looking every bit the movie star but somehow more real than the polished celebrities who usually sat in that chair. Carson stood to shake his hand warmly, and both men settled in. The band faded, and Carson launched into his opening with practiced ease. "Clint, it's genuinely great to have you here," Carson said, his blue eyes twinkling. "I understand Honky Tonk Man is something special. Tell us about it." Eastwood leaned back, completely at ease. "Well, Johnny, it's a story about a Depression-era country singer trying to make it to the Grand Ole Opry before his health gives out. We shot it down in Texas and Tennessee. It's different from what people expect from me." "Now, you directed this one yourself and your son Kyle is in it, correct?" Carson asked, setting up the conversation perfectly. "That's right," Eastwood nodded. "It's the first time I've directed myself and worked with Kyle. Made it personal in ways I didn't expect." The audience laughed at Carson's perfectly timed reactions as they discussed the film. For several minutes, everything proceeded exactly as planned. They talked about directing, shared stories about working in the Texas heat, and Carson worked in gentle humor about Eastwood's stoic persona. "You know, Clint, you've built an incredible career playing these strong, silent types," Carson observed, his tone light. "Men who don't show emotion, who handle everything alone. Is that who you really are, or is that just brilliant acting?" Eastwood smiled slightly. "I suppose I'm somewhere in between, Johnny. I don't talk unless there's something worth saying." Carson chuckled, and the audience loved it. This was classic Tonight Show magic, two professionals making it look effortless. But then Johnny's expression shifted, and he asked the question that changed everything. Carson leaned forward slightly, and his demeanor transformed in a way regular viewers would recognize. This was the moment when Johnny stopped being an entertainer and became something closer to a confidant. It was what made him legendary, his ability to find the human story beneath the Hollywood surface. "Clint, can I ask you something more personal?" Carson said, his voice dropping to a quieter register. "You've had this extraordinary career, won every award, conquered every genre. But you've also lost people close to you. You've dealt with divorces, estrangement, years on the road away from family. How do you handle the loneliness that comes with being Clint Eastwood?" The studio audience grew noticeably quieter. This wasn't typical late-night territory. Carson had a gift for these moments, finding vulnerability in even the most guarded guests. Eastwood's expression changed. The casual movie star charm faded, replaced by something more genuine. He looked at Carson for a long moment, as if measuring how honest to be on national television. "You know, Johnny," Eastwood began slowly, "most people don't ask me that question. They assume because I play these self-sufficient characters that I prefer being alone. That solitude is some kind of strength." Carson nodded, not interrupting, giving Eastwood space. The camera captured the shift in body language, Eastwood's shoulders less rigid, his gaze more direct. "When my father died in 1970, Eastwood continued, his voice lower now, more intimate, I realized something about this career we've chosen. People see the films, the awards, the magazine covers, and they think it must fill something inside you. What do they miss?" Carson asked gently, genuinely curious now. This wasn't performance anymore. This was real. Eastwood paused, and in that pause, you could feel 70 million people leaning closer to their television sets. Even the cameramen seemed to hold their breath. "They miss the fact that success is the loneliest achievement there is," Eastwood said quietly. "Every film I've made, every character I've played, every award I've won, none of it was in the room when my dad took his last breath. None of it sat with me at 3 in the morning when my marriage fell apart. Success doesn't keep you company, Johnny. It just makes the empty spaces more obvious." Carson's jovial expression had completely disappeared. He was watching Eastwood with something close to recognition, one man who understood the weight of fame speaking to another. "I've spent 25 years playing men who don't need anyone," Eastwood continued, his voice steady but carrying an edge of something deeper. "But the hardest role I've ever played is convincing myself that's actually true." The audience was completely silent. This wasn't what they'd expected. They tuned in for laughs and movie clips. Instead, they were witnessing something rare, genuine human vulnerability on live television. And then Eastwood said something that made Johnny Carson freeze completely. "Before we continue, do me a favor, hit that like button if this story is hitting you as hard as it hit America in 1982. And comment below, where are you watching this from tonight?" "The truth is, Johnny," Eastwood said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been terrified of ending up like the characters I play. Alone at the end. Victorious but empty. And I don't know if I've already become that, or if there's still time to be something else." For the first time in 30 years of hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson was completely speechless. His mouth opened slightly as if to respond, but no words came out. The camera captured everything: the shock, the empathy, the sudden recognition of shared fear. The silence stretched for 7 full seconds. In television time, that's an eternity. The audience didn't know whether to react or stay quiet. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Carson's eyes glistened visibly. Not quite tears, but close. Closer than 70 million Americans had ever seen from the man who always kept his composure. "Clint," Carson said, his voice noticeably different now, softer, almost breaking, "I didn't expect you to go there. That's incredibly honest." "Most people don't," Eastwood replied. "They expect the tough guy. The man with no name who needs no one. But you asked a real question, Johnny. You deserve a real answer." Carson looked down at his desk, gathering himself. When he looked back up, his professional mask had slipped entirely. "You know, I lost my son Rick in a car accident in 1973. And every single night since then, I've come out here, smiled at America, made jokes, and pretended that I'm okay. 60 million people think Johnny Carson has it all figured out. But they don't see you at 4 in the morning, Eastwood said, not as a question but as a statement of understanding. No, Carson agreed quietly. They don't see that at all. The studio was so silent you could hear the cameras whirring. Doc Severinsen sat frozen with his trumpet. Ed McMahon stared at his desk. The audience seemed to have forgotten they were even there. This was no longer entertainment. This was two men acknowledging truths they rarely spoke aloud. The worst part, Eastwood continued, is that I've made 63 films, worked with the greatest directors in history, and none of it taught me how to be a father my kids could actually talk to. None of it taught me how to be a husband who was actually present. I can play heroes, but I couldn't figure out how to be one at home. Carson nodded slowly, and a single tear actually rolled down his cheek. Johnny Carson, the king of late night, the man who interviewed presidents and never lost his cool, was crying on live television. I know exactly what you mean, Carson said, his voice thick. God, Clint, I know. Eastwood leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, speaking directly to Carson as if 70 million people weren't watching. The question you really asked me, Johnny, wasn't about handling loneliness. What you were really asking was whether men like us, who've built everything on being untouchable, can ever actually let someone in. Carson's jaw tightened, fighting to maintain composure. Was I that obvious? Only to someone who's asking himself the same question every single day, Eastwood replied. The camera pushed in tight on Carson's face, capturing every emotion: pain, recognition, gratitude, and something close to relief that someone finally understood. How do you find your way back? Carson asked, his voice barely audible. How do you stop being the character and start being the man? And Eastwood's answer would become one of the most quoted moments in television history. Eastwood took a deep breath and looked directly at Carson with those piercing eyes that had stared down countless movie villains but now held only compassion. You don't find your way back, Johnny, Eastwood said slowly. You find your way forward. You stop trying to fix what's already gone and start being honest about what's still here. Carson listened like a man desperate for an answer he'd been seeking for 9 years. I spent so long thinking that if I just made one more great film, won one more award, proved myself one more time, then the emptiness would go away, Eastwood continued. But that's not how it works. Achievement doesn't heal loneliness. It just gives you better stories to tell yourself about why you're still alone. So what does work? Carson asked, and there was something almost childlike in the question, pure, unguarded hope. Eastwood smiled, but it was a sad smile. Being honest. With yourself first, then with the people who still want to know you. I wasted 15 years trying to protect people from my darkness. Trying to be the strong one because I thought that's what everyone needed from me. But it's not what you needed for yourself, Carson said, understanding dawning on his face. Exactly, Eastwood agreed. And here's what nobody tells you, Johnny. The success, the fame, the achievement, it doesn't fill the hole. It never does. The only thing that even comes close is letting people see you without the armor. And that's terrifying for men like us. The audience was completely absorbed now, not as spectators but as witnesses to something profound. Several people in the front rows had tears streaming down their faces. You know what I realized? Eastwood continued. Every character I've played who found peace did it by finally letting someone in. By admitting they couldn't do it alone. The movies had the answer all along, I was just too stubborn to see it applied to my own life. Carson laughed, a genuine, emotional laugh mixed with painful recognition. We spend our lives telling other people's stories, but we miss the lessons in our own. That's exactly right, Eastwood said. And the real tragedy is that we figure this out too late. By the time you understand what actually matters, you've already lost years you can't get back. People who gave up waiting for you to show up emotionally. Is it too late? Carson asked, and the vulnerability in that question was staggering. Here was the most powerful man in television, asking a movie star if there was still hope. Eastwood held his gaze. For some things, yes. For the time I missed with my kids when they were young, I don't get that back. But for showing up now? For being honest with them about my regrets and actually listening to theirs? No, Johnny. It's not too late for that. Carson nodded slowly, absorbing this like medicine. The question, Eastwood said, is whether you're brave enough to stop being Johnny Carson for a minute and just be John. Because the Carson persona protects you from getting hurt, but it also protects you from being known. And that's a hell of a trade-off. And then Eastwood said something that would haunt Carson for the rest of his life. If this conversation is moving you, let me know in the comments. And subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. Tell me, what country are you watching this from right now? The real tragedy, Johnny, Eastwood said, his voice steady but weighted with years of hard-won understanding, is that we spend our whole lives becoming someone the world admires, and in the process, we become someone we can barely recognize in the mirror. And no amount of applause will ever change that. Carson's face went completely still. The camera captured the exact moment his expression shifted from vulnerability to something deeper, recognition, regret, and a profound sadness that no joke could mask. I need to. Carson started, then stopped. He looked at his note cards, then at Eastwood, then at the audience as if suddenly remembering where he was. His hand trembled slightly. We need to take a commercial break. Doc Severinsen and the band started playing, but something was wrong. Carson didn't do his usual wave to the camera. He didn't deliver a quick joke or tease what was coming next. He just sat there, staring at Eastwood with an expression America had never seen before. As the show cut to commercial, those in the studio witnessed what viewers at home missed: Johnny Carson reaching across and gripping Clint Eastwood's hand. Not a handshake, a grip. The desperate kind between two men who just shared something that changed them. Thank you, Carson said, so quietly only Eastwood and Ed McMahon could hear. I needed to hear that more than you know. Eastwood squeezed back. We all do, Johnny. We all do. When the show came back from commercial 3 minutes later, Carson had put his mask back on, mostly. But anyone watching closely could see the difference. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes the way it usually did. His jokes came a beat slower. Something fundamental had shifted in the man America thought they knew. We'll be right back with more from Clint Eastwood, Carson said to the camera, his voice professionally bright but carrying an undercurrent of something raw and real. But the real conversation was already over. What came after was just television. The rest of the interview covered standard promotional material, film clips, lighter stories about the shoot, banter that felt hollow compared to what had come before. Eastwood graciously played along, giving Carson space to recover his composure for America. But those who knew Johnny Carson noticed something changed after that night. He became more willing to ask deeper questions in interviews. More comfortable with silence. Less interested in the performance and more interested in the person. Ed McMahon later said, that conversation with Eastwood cracked something open in Johnny. He started calling his sons more. He'd sit in his dressing room after the show just staring at old family photos. The king of late night had been reminded that the crown gets heavy when you wear it alone. In the years that followed, Carson would occasionally reference that conversation with Eastwood, never in detail, but with a kind of reverence that suggested those words stayed with him until his death in 2005. Eastwood, characteristically, never spoke about the interview publicly. But his longtime friend Sondra Locke revealed years later that Clint kept a handwritten note from Carson in his wallet that simply said, "You were right. Thank you for the courage. J." That night, late-night television didn't just go silent for 7 seconds. It went deep. Two legends stopped performing and reminded America that beneath the fame and carefully crafted personas, they were just men struggling with the same questions about meaning, connection, and legacy that all of us face. So there you have it. The night Johnny Carson asked a simple question and got an answer that changed him forever. Clint Eastwood didn't just promote a movie, he delivered a truth that cut through decades of Hollywood pretense and reminded us all that success means nothing if you're too afraid to be known. Make sure you subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Hit that like button if this moved you. And let me know in the comments, do you think Carson ever found the peace he was looking for? Where are you watching this from today?